Across all my social media platforms, the number one reason I hear from people as to why they cannot attend protests is disability. And we really need to talk about that. So if you are someone who's part of the resistance, if you marched on April 5th or April 19th, if you're planning on attending the May 1st and 3rd events, if you're involved in the defense of democracy and you care about the disabled folks in our communities, please comment, like, share. Let's help spread the word, and let's help figure out how we can brainstorm together to be more inclusive of disabled protesters. One of the things that we talked about at a recent Indivisible meeting was, how do we make sure that folks who are representative of the most vulnerable demographics, the folks who are being the most harmed by the Trump regime, have an ability to show up and protest and defend their own rights? Not that we expect those folks to be carrying the banner and be doing all of the heavy lifting and the labor, because people who are the most marginalized and have the fewest resources should not be shouldered with all of the work. I frequently get comments like, why are so many people at protests white middle-aged moms and like white boomers? Well, because we have a lot of privilege. We have extra time and resources. We have the capability, the freedom in our schedule to be able to show up. That's just the reality of a lot of grassroots organizing. In the US, it is white middle-class people who have the bandwidth, who have the extra wiggle room. I can go to a protest without being afraid of ICE picking me up. I don't have to work 3 different jobs where I have no paid time off and I might get fired if I miss my shift. My kids are older. I don't have childcare requirements. Despite some significant health issues, I am able-bodied enough that I can march in a protest for hours. So while what people might ideally like to see is a representative sample of the most oppressed by Donald Trump showing up to protest, that is unrealistic. It's also really, frankly, unhelpful and tokenizing to put that expectation on vulnerable populations to bring a representative to the protest. But at the same time, we need to do our best to be inclusive of people who are being hurt the most and do want to fight back. Not that they're not already fighting back by just existing, or they're not doing economic boycotts, or there aren't other ways that they are trying to defend their liberty. But we want to make sure that we provide opportunities to protest, that we are inclusive of people who don't look like me. So what are y'all doing? What is your local grassroots group doing to be more inclusive of folks who are not, middle class, white, able-bodied? I read a really interesting piece in Mother Jones a couple of days ago. It was actually published back on April 5th that has me thinking in a different way about what inclusivity means when it comes to protests, particularly about making sure that disabled voices feel heard and that they have the chance to stand up for themselves and for their communities and for democracy. The piece is called "For Some Disabled Protesters, Hands Off Went Virtual." The piece is by Julia Matreau in Mother Jones. At a hands-off rally for people with long COVID, Amanda Finley was filled with emotions. She talked about how devastated she was to lose people who had suffered from the condition and died due to lack of support, and talked about how she, an IRS employee, had gotten reduction in force notices sent to her office, but she still chooses to have hope. Amid a day of protests against the destruction unleashed by Donald Trump, Finley likened the task ahead to a time when her hometown had been struck by a tornado. We quickly realized there's no such thing as rebuilding. It's just building a new reality, she said. That's exactly what we have to do now, build a new reality. And that's one of the things that I've said, that we get to decide what the future looks like. We don't have to go back to how things were before. We get to build something new after all of this is over. After we wage this fight to restore democracy, we get to decide what reforms we want. We get to decide that we have healthcare for all, that everybody is housed, that the rich are taxed. We get to decide what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness looks like for regular Americans, that this country doesn't have to be controlled by the super rich. We get to dream. We get to dream big. Finley, who lives in Kansas City, Missouri, did not share her experience while standing in a crowd along sign-waving demonstrators. Instead, she was speaking at a virtual event she had begun organizing just 3 days before. It was one of 3 online hands-off protests put on to serve disabled and chronically ill people who find it more accessible to protest from home, if not from their beds. The Zoom calls provided a space for disabled people to come together, sit in solidarity, and discuss how cuts and attacks to Medicaid, Social Security, disability education services, DEI, scientific research, and more impact them directly. The events drew such interest that they also set up YouTube live streams to accommodate the demand. In-person protests, with their noise, limited seating, and unmasked crowds, can be inaccessible for disabled people. I always wear a mask to a protest, and if you ever see me at one and you forgot yours, I keep spares in my backpack, along with granola bars and sunscreen and a first aid kit. So come grab one for me. I've always got KN95s in my backpack. While some may grimace at using Zoom for social activities, for many chronically ill and disabled people, having the platform continue to be available is a relief. Marie Folliatar, a longtime organizer in Maine who is disabled by long COVID and cancer, talked on the long COVID call about how the hands-off protests were taking place on the 48th anniversary of the start of what became known as the Section 504 sit-ins, a landmark series of protests urging enforcement of a federal law advancing disability rights. Folliatar noted that the Section 504 is at risk today from a lawsuit from 17 Republican attorneys general. There may come a time where we will have to take similar action and find ways to mobilize to make sure that we are seen, Folliatar said. We know that we have to teach everyone how to include us. I am haunted by the language of our new OMB director, Russell Vaught, who said, "We need to go after the mandatory programs," referring to Medicaid and Social Security. At another Zoom hands-off event hosted by disability-focused nonprofits 10 Minutes a Day and DIY Abled, DIY Abled's founder, Priya Ray, argued that when organizing for change, it's crucial to recognize that disabled people have different needs. We learn from each other how we accommodate other disabled people, Ray said in comments that were interpreted into American Sign Language and transcribed with live captioning. Accommodating as many disabled people as we can is very important because that makes the movement of disability much stronger. Dupree Edwards, a disability advocate, encouraged people on the video conference to contact their members of Congress, no matter their party. Call your reps and tell them how your rights are being taken away, Edwards said, and we want to protect Medicaid and Social Security. In light of the unlawful dismantling of the Department of Ed, Edwards cautioned that access to education for disabled people is under attack. We're going back into institutions, back into segregation, back to where people with disabilities weren't even welcome in the classroom, he cautioned, and explained how programs and funding that can help disabled students to go to school are being stripped away. To highlight those stakes, Edwards got personal, explaining how those supports, quote, made me into the person I am today, end quote. We don't need everybody marching in the streets, but we need everybody actively resisting fascism in whatever way that they can. Providing online spaces for disabled folks to come together and protest is really important. I really appreciated this perspective, and it makes me think about how important it is for the May 1st and 3rd events to set up something similar. We're talking more and more about disruptions of labor and moving more and more toward a general strike and how important that is in the defense of democracy, how we know that that is going to be an effective strategy. I've talked about the flight attendant strike that happened during the first Trump regime. National labor strikes are highly effective. But we know that not everybody has a job that they can walk out of, and not everybody is able to participate in a strike. But that doesn't mean there aren't ways you can't support strikers, even if you're not physically able to do what they're doing, right? Montgomery bus boycott was funded by the bake sale. We all can participate in those bake sale activities. We all can participate in economic boycotts. We all can participate in calling our electeds. There is a place for every single one of us in the resistance. My local Indivisible group is talking about setting up childcare. People who might not be able to march in a protest would be happy to babysit other people's children so they can. We also talked about how people, again, they might have a car and they can drive. They can't necessarily march in a protest, but they could drive people to and from. Other folks might not be able to do a general strike from their job. They might be, for example, a nurse in an emergency room, and they need to stay on the job. But they could contribute to a bail fund or to a strike fund for people who can walk off. We are all going to have to take on a significant level of sacrifice. We're all going to have to make contributions. Not everybody's contribution is the same, and part of being creative and adaptive is thinking about the fact that we are diverse people with diverse needs and diverse bandwidths and different capabilities that we all bring to the table. That means we all have different places that we can plug in. In permaculture, one of our principles is use the edges and value the marginal. It should not be solely the obligation of the folks who are on the margins to figure out how they can be useful and how their needs should be accommodated. It's up to all of us to use and value the margins. It's up to all of us to figure out how to be inclusive and to honor the contributions that people who don't fit in a very narrow range of white middle class and have, lots of privilege, how those folks, they matter. They matter, their contributions, their ideas really matter, and they're necessary in the resistance. So I would love to hear what you think about that, what your ideas are, what you would like to see grassroots movements do to be inclusive of disability, to allow people to give what they can, to remove barriers to access so that people can step into the fight for democracy.